The Committee on Natural Resources will come to order. The committee is meeting today to hear testimony from our invited witnesses. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at this hearing is limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 o'clock today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Because of the broad interest in today's subject matter, we received interest from other members who do not sit on this committee, but would like to participate. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all interested members be allowed to join us on the dais. If there's no objection, so ordered. I will now turn to my opening statement and then recognize my colleague, Mr. Lamborn, to put into the record the opening statement of the ranking member, Mr. Bishop. I would like to, first of all, welcome everyone to this hearing. Thank the witnesses for taking the time to join us today. We're here to discuss what is being called a reorganization of the Bureau of Land Management. In reality, given the lack of transparency, analysis, and consultation, this appears to be nothing more than a poorly veiled attempt to dismantle a federal agency. The BLM manages 245 million surface acres and 700 million acres of subsurface mineral interest, all of which belong to the American people. The agency employs more than 9,000 people and has an annual budget of $1.2 billion. Try to imagine a 1.2 million private corporation deciding to move across the country without any clear guidelines, reasonable analysis, or concrete goals. And yet this is exactly what is happening with the Bureau of Land Management. And the BLM shareholders, the American public, should be deeply concerned. The Department of Interior has done nothing to alleviate concerns that this move has been hastily planned, poorly researched, and questionably motivated. In fact, one of the few responses we received from the department was an admission that no tribal consultation have been performed, a clear neglect of the Department of Interior's trust responsibilities. There is no doubt this plan fits this administration's pattern of trying to sell out our environment and natural resources. Recent comments made by the President's acting Chief of Staff, Mike Mulvaney, at a gathering of wealthy donors shed light on what is really going on. At the event, Mr. Mulvaney spoke about the decision to relocate 2 bureaus from Washington, D.C. to Kansas City. More than half of the experienced scientists and economists at these bureaus chose to quit instead of uprooting their families. Referencing that, Mr. Mulvaney said, "Now, it is nearly impossible to fire a federal worker. I know that because a lot of them work for me. But by simply saying to people, we're going to take you outside the bubble, outside this liberal haven of Washington, D.C., they quit. What a wonderful way to streamline government. It's hard to consider anything this administration does in good faith when they are so transparent about what the true motivations are. Taking BLM staff out of D.C. won't help customer service, but it will make it harder for the agency to work with anyone other than oil and gas industry and interest. It will push many career staff to leave their roles, destroying institutional knowledge and hampering the department's ability to meet its mandates and standards. It isn't a close call or a partisan issue. This move is being strongly opposed not just by the Public Lands Foundation, made up largely of bipartisan BLM retirees, which is represented here at today's hearing. The National Association of Forest Service Retirees said this move would, quote, hamstring the agency. That much is clear to almost any leader who has spent his or her career managing public lands. Jim Coswell, the most recent confirmed BLM director in a Republican administration, said in testimony saying, if implemented, the reorganization will functionally dismantle BLM. Hundreds of former land managers, former leaders, former agency heads, Republicans and Democrats alike, with thousands, if not tens of thousands of years of combined experience being raised, living, and working in the American West, are speaking with one voice, and they are saying as clearly as possible that this is a terrible idea. The other side, we have Senator Cory Gardner and the people of Grand Junction, who admittedly do well under this plan. With all due respect to the people of Grand Junction and the senator, I put more faith in the voices of experts at this point. It's no coincidence that at the same time this reorganization was announced, the administration appointed Mr. William Perry Pendley, an avowed opponent of public lands, as the acting head of BLM. They have even sent him before us today, and we welcome him to testify. What better way to eliminate the BLM than to push out its staff, to replace them with leadership whose writings and speeches over 3 decades suggest that he thinks the agency shouldn't exist in the first place? If this BLM organization goes through, it would represent a major win for this administration and their 2-year-long campaign to undermine America's public lands heritage. The BLM plays an essential role in managing our public lands and protecting our public trust resources. We cannot let Secretary Bernhardt, the acting director, turn it into a one-stop shop for companies looking to knock down public land protections on a quest to drill, mine, graze on every ounce of public land. I want to again thank the witnesses, and I look forward to your testimony. I now will recognize my colleague, Mr. Lombard, for his statement. Sir, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Ranking Member Rob Bishop, who's on his way but couldn't be here at this moment, I'll make the following opening statement, and it will be a different perspective. I appreciate my friend from Arizona for convening this hearing today. I, along with my fellow Republicans on this committee, have long contended that the best land management decisions are made by those who live, work, and raise families closest to the areas impacted. I believe this move of Bureau of Land Management headquarters out west is long overdue and will yield tremendous results for land management. Unfortunately, based on the misleading title of today's hearing, I fear we are in store for some melodramatic hyperbole from some of my friends on the other side of the aisle. It is important that we separate political posturing from the simple realities of what we are discussing today. The facts are quite straightforward. The BLM manages close to 250 million acres of land. An astounding 99% of those lands are located west of the Mississippi River. Moving BLM decision makers closer to the lands that they manage will undoubtedly improve agency efficiency, accountability, and local engagement. To argue otherwise is ignorant at best and willfully misleading at worst. We've already seen great success with this concept at the National Interagency Fire Center, where the BLM relocated their assistant director, deputy assistant directors, and staff for the Fire and Aviation Program to the National Interagency Fire Center, the nation's support center for wildland firefighting, located in Boise, Idaho. By all accounts, this relocation has increased efficiency and improved coordination efforts to combat the deadly wildfires that have continued to afflict our western states. These clear benefits seen in the realm of fire activities will most assuredly translate to other BLM functions as well. By having more leadership on the ground, the BLM will be able to respond quicker, coordinate more effectively, and manage with more clarity and on-the-ground perspective. I think it is also important to dispel any misconception that this is somehow a partisan issue. There is broad support for this move amongst a wide variety of stakeholders from diverse political persuasions. One of the more vocal supporters of this move is a former Democratic member of this committee and currently Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis. I'd like to briefly share a video clip of his thoughts, which I believe concisely summarize the many merits of this scheduled move. Will the clerk show the clip?
This is a big deal. Part of the Bureau of Land Management, which manages our public lands in Colorado. Remember, we have U.S. Forest Service lands, Bureau of Land Management lands, mostly western Colorado. They're going to be moving close to 100 people to Grand Junction. So it'll be a major office of BLM. Also really important for Grand Junction and for all of Colorado. Important for Grand Junction because it really puts them on the map with being a center for BLM close to the lands that they manage, but also for all of Colorado because Front Range residents enjoy our public lands, hiking, hunting, fishing. So it's really really exciting that we're bringing the management of those lands a little bit closer to where they are in western Colorado.
And it'll impact the Front Range, you think, as well?
Absolutely. First of all, there's going to be there should be plans for an additional flight from Grand Junction to Washington every week. But in addition, there'll be a lot more transit in and out of Denver around relating to our public lands and their management. We're home to the outdoor tourism and recreation industry, the trade show of the outdoor retailers. So we're really becoming a major mecca for outdoor tourism and recreation. Having close to 100 BLM people on the ground in western Colorado will really help put us on the map even more.
I couldn't agree more. This is a good move for BLM, this is a good move for taxpayers, and this is a great move for the West. My hope is that today we'll now evaluate the tools of this committee and oversight functions of Congress to expand upon and improve reorganization of the Department of Interior and work with, rather than against, the department to improve the delivery of services to the people we represent. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lambert. Under committee rules, the chair will now recognize Mr. William Perry Pendley, Deputy Director of Policy and Programs at the Bureau of Land Management. Sir, thank you and welcome. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to discuss the Department of Interior's relocation to the Bureau of Land Management. First, however, I will address attacks on my character and misrepresentations of my 30 years as a public attorney. On July 15, 2019, I took the oath of office to defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and I absolutely will do so. That oath is as important and meaningful to me as the oath I took 5 decades ago when I joined the Marine Corps. It has been asserted that I do not believe in federal lands. That is not accurate and is a misrepresentation of my works and beliefs. I love America's public land. Biked, fished, hunted, and lived there. It has always been my home. For me, public lands are a fact of life. And as a proud and loyal member of the Trump administration, I wholeheartedly support the President and Secretary Bernhardt's crystal clear statement that we will not dispose of or transfer in a wholesale manner our public lands. Contrary to mischaracterizations by the media, as a leader of a nonprofit public interest law firm, I represented pro bono men and women in the West who work, live on the land, who log, mine, develop energy, recreate, or draw their support from the federal lands that surround them. I was proud to represent them in defending their constitutionally protected liberties, demanding adherence to the rule of law, and redressing their grievances, a right guaranteed every American. In our litigation, we both defended the decisions of federal agencies and sought to reverse federal actions my clients found wanting. As an attorney, I take my ethical obligations very seriously. Thus, I sought out, obtained, and followed the advice of career department ethics officials to ensure that I am in full compliance with federal laws, rules, regulations, and President Trump's heightened ethics pledge. Secretary Bernhardt made clear that relocation is not just about where functions are performed, but whether or not we increase our service to the American public. As to the BLM, he set a high bar. We delegate more responsibility to the field, we maximize our services to the American people, and we increase our senior presence closest to the resources that we manage. After months of careful planning and advice from senior career leaders in the Bureau, Western states and localities, multiple youth stakeholders, and our neighbors, we'll achieve these objectives by maintaining necessary core BLM functions at the headquarters in Washington, D.C., optimizing the efficiency of some headquarters functions now in Washington by relocating them to state offices where they best support those offices' activities, allocating certain headquarters positions to state offices to perform state office functions, and establishing a Western headquarters in Grand Junction, Colorado. The realignment will have many benefits. We will enhance management oversight and communication, improve customer service and partner/stakeholder engagement, increase functionality, lower lease payments and increase consolidation and reduce travel expenses and personnel costs. Specific positions will be identified for relocation 1 week from today, and affected employees will be notified promptly. The BLM values every employee, and we are ensuring each affected employee receives necessary information before being required to make any decision. We assembled and made available to employees teams of skilled human resources professionals to provide knowledgeable and compassionate assistance. We also scheduled employee assistance program counselors to support one-on-one affected employees and their families throughout the day and week. Finally, for employees unable to make the move, we hope to find each a position in the Department of Interior family. We're working aggressively in that regard. Nearly every Western state will realize significant benefits from this reorganization thanks to the presence of additional experienced senior staff with the expertise to address headquarters issues and priorities, and who understand how to utilize that knowledge to advance each state's localized day-to-day operations. More importantly, however, the BLM will be better able to serve the American people with an increased staffing presence closer to the resources that it manages. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable testimony. The chairs will now recognize members for questions, and under Committee Rule 3D, each member will have 5 minutes. I'm going to defer my questions, and in order of people coming into the meeting, let me recognize Ms. Holland for her questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pendley, for being here. Thank you for your service as a Marine to our country. I appreciate that. So I just have a few questions. In 2009, at a Republican breakfast forum, you were quoted mocking American Indian religious practitioners that increasing insistence that federal lands and private property be off limits because it's holy to them, using air quotes to punctuate holy. Do you believe this behavior is a good representation of the Bureau of Land Management that is responsible for, and I quote from the BLM's fiscal year 20 budget request, the largest, most diverse, and scientifically important aggregation of cultural, historical, and paleontological resources on public lands?
I was not speaking as a member of the BLM. I was speaking as a private attorney representing private clients. I'm proud to speak on behalf of the Bureau of Land Management now, and I'm particularly pleased with the opportunities to work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and tribes to establish tribal energy resource agreements to permit tribes to develop their energy resources. And I think that's one of the reasons why we need to make the move west with our skilled people, because we need to have the energy, mineral, and realty management experts who are now in Washington out in the field with the state offices to work hand in glove with tribal leaders on tribal lands to ensure their ability to develop the resources. Congress passed last year in 2018 a change to that law to permit more of these agreements. We're working aggressively with the BIA to have those agreements, and I'll be a very, very strong advocate for tribes being able to enter into those agreements to take over the oil and gas leasing functions on their land if that's their decision to do so. And I'm pleased to have that responsibility, and believe me, I'll be speaking as the leader of the Bureau of Land Management in our work with tribal leaders, and I think that the work that we perform in these agreements will be proof of the pudding for our willingness and desire to serve their needs and their interests, ma'am.
So I'm a little confused. So you were able to just forget what you did back then, and now that you're working for BLM, everything's okay? Is that what you're telling me?
I have a new client. My client's the American people. I'm a zealous advocate for my client. I'll be a zealous advocate for the American people and serving their interest and the interest they have in multiple use lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management. It's not just energy and minerals, it's recreation, and a hallmark of the Trump administration is access to recreational lands.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So would it be fair to say then that the BLM has a significant responsibility for managing cultural resources? You talk a lot about developing energy resources, but there are tribes who want to protect their land, who want to protect their ancestral homelands because right now they feel like they're under attack. So how can the BLM justify not performing any consultation with tribal leaders on the BLM reorganization? Cultural resources are not just a matter of course. They represent a history and culture and our living connections to our past. And not just my past, because my ancestral homelands are Chaco Canyon, Bears Ears, Grand Staircase Escalante, but these belong to every single American. So how can you justify not having proper tribal consultation when that really is one of the missions of the Department of the Interior?
I arrived on July 15th. I am advised that the consultations that were required took place before I arrived.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I will continue to engage in those consultations. I will tell you that I think the best way for us to achieve the objectives you seek and that I seek in the protection of cultural resources for which we have a legal responsibility.
Thank you. I'll move on to another question right now. Thank you
Yes,
so
ma'am.
much. So now that you know that tribal consultations were not performed properly, if you will, I mean, just you come in on July 15th and they tell you they've been done, but now that you know they haven't been done, because I'm telling you they haven't been done properly, because I have heard from many, many tribes who said they were not done properly, do you feel a commitment to make sure that you right that wrong, that you remedy the situation and go out and discover exactly what it is that Indian tribes want, or that their voice is even heard within the BLM? Now that you know that it wasn't done properly, can you commit to making sure that it will be done properly?
The voices we continue to hear from are Western voices, members of Congress, governors, tribal leaders, local leaders, and what we're hearing is we at the BLM lack resources. We lack people at the state and district and field offices to engage in the very activity you speak of, which is consultation. We need our expert energy people now in Washington to be in these state offices.
Thank you
to
very
meet those
much.
needs.
Thank you. It's very clear that that's the energy part is what's important to you and not the voices of the people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to quote my illustrious friend to my left here, the chairman of this committee. He said in July on this move, "The BLM officials based in Washington are here to work directly with Congress and their federal colleagues." BLM officials are here to work with Congress. That's one way of looking at the world. Many of us look at it entirely differently, that the role of the BLM is to work with the public, is to work with the American people. So we have two ways of looking at the world. Does BLM work for and with Congress, or do they work for the American people? And if they work for the American people, doesn't it make sense that they are located where the lands they administer on behalf of the people are located? I think it does. And I hear a charge that this is somehow a dismantling of BLM. It's to make the committee, the agency less effective, to make it wither up somehow and dry up and blow away, instead of making it more effective. I think actually this move will make things more effective. Mr. Pendley, I'd like to hear your views on this.
Oh, I absolutely concur, Congressman. I will respond to one of the comments the chairman made. Simply, it is my desire, it's the Secretary's desire that we not lose a single employee. Our effort is to ensure either employees are able to go to a more fulfilling job out west where they have a lower cost of living, their increased purchasing power, they have shorter commute times, and they have locations, availability to the resources we as Westerners love to enjoy. And if they are not able to do that, we want to find them a home in the Department of the Interior. We put on a freeze in the Bureau of Land Management at the end of August. We're not going to hire anybody except the people who may be displaced, and we have a freeze underway at the department, department-wide, to ensure the availability of these opportunities. I want to assure Congress that we will continue to do our core headquarters functions. And by that, I mean our congressional affairs, our regulatory affairs, our public affairs, our budget function, and our Freedom of Information Act request. And with regard to those employees, to counter concerns expressed by former employees, those people will no longer be over on M Street next to the Washington Nationals baseball stadium. They're going to be in Main Interior, hallway away from the Secretary of the Interior, the Deputy Secretary, and other decision makers, and they'll be able to be responsive to the requests of Congress. But at the same time, our top people, and bear in mind who we're talking about here, we're talking about nearly half of our 24 SES, nearly half of our 256 GS-14s, north of 60% of our 79 GS-15s are all in the headquarters, are all here. And we need them out in the field to answer the concern of Western members of Congress and governors and local leaders and tribal leaders and stakeholders to say, hey, you need to staff up. We need your best people here. And one of the things that I think we're going to see is we're going to see better relationship with our stakeholders. We're going to see a better understanding of Western communities, and we're also going to see decision-making, problem-solving earlier in the process. Instead of waiting for a problem to blow up when it reaches M Street or headquarters, we can solve that problem by meeting with local people and having our top people out there, our top SES and GS-15s and 14s in the field with more oversight and accountability.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read two items into the record. Unanimous consent. One is a letter from myself, Representative Tipton, and Buck from the Colorado delegation, and Senator Gardner.
Without objection.
And a second is a letter dated today from the Associated Governments of Northwest Colorado endorsing this move.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Pendley, if everything was to stay neutral, everything was to be a wash and function just the same as it was before after this move takes place, I think a lot of us would be happy. But it sounds like this will actually be an improvement in both accountability and efficiency. Is that true?
Absolutely. I think it'll be a remarkable improvement. And let me give you an aspect of that. Many of our jobs, we're talking about 222 jobs going to perform headquarters functions in the state offices. We're talking about 74 jobs going into the state office to do state office functions. Many of those jobs are unfilled, and they have been unfilled for weeks, if not months, and sometimes years. And it's simply because it's almost impossible to hire people here in the Washington area. You know better than anybody, all of us do, the cost of living in Washington, D.C. The commuting times are crazy, the cost of living. And so we're going to have an increased ability to hire people in the field, whether they be recreational experts or planning experts or oil and gas or logging people or people who can help us with our expertise that we need. I think we're going to have an easier time hiring employees. It'll be better for the Bureau.
Thank you. Mr. Cox?
Thank you so much. Acting Director Pendley, the Department of Interior's July 16th letter to the Appropriations Committee informing them about the department's plans for the BLM reorganization is clearly stated that, quote, each position currently performing headquarters-specific functions both in D.C. and in the field were assessed and analyzed. Yet, we're here today as the authorizing committee for BLM, and this analysis has never been provided. I don't think you, frankly, inspired a lot of faith in making these drastic changes without providing nearly any background to Congress or even to your own employees, who seem to have some major concerns about these moves. So my clarifications questions for you today is how and when was this analysis conducted? And how did it occur without consulting with current agency staff who seem to be blindsided by these changes? You yourself, I think, quoted the other day that, quote, I deeply regret, and this is to your own employees, that we have not been able to be more factually forthcoming with you prior to today. And I think that was just a few days ago, that you have not been factually forthcoming with your own employees. So first question, if you can get back with how did this study occur, and can you provide us with a copy of that analysis?
Well, we did provide a copy of the analysis, the cost-benefit analysis that was prepared by our Policy Management and Budget Office, and it's reached conclusions that this is a cost-benefit effective way to go, that it will save money in the long run, and it'll make us more effective as an organization. I can tell you that our Assistant Director for Operations, Mike Ned, who has testified here in the past, has worked hand in glove with our assistant directors, Assistant Secretary Joe Baylash, Deputy Assistant Secretary Casey Hammond, in interviewing and discussing each individual position of the 222 and the 74 to say where is the best position for this person to be. I'll give you an example. For example, California. California is really the best location for all of the above energy solutions, whether it's fossil fuels or it's wind or solar or geothermal, as well as Nevada. And we are sending some of our top people who are experts in those areas out to California to do those headquarters functions and to make California a center of excellence with regard to renewable energy. But those consultations have been made, and when I said in my opening remarks, I meant it sincerely, specifically with assistant directors on an individual by individual, position by position basis, saying, where should this person go? Where should this job go? Where can we get the most bang for the buck to serve the needs of the American people?
Well, thank you so much on that. It doesn't seem like, though, you spoke to the staff level employees. But the other question is, I looked today, I think most of the BLM's lands are probably in Nevada. And a flight from Nevada, from Reno, Nevada to Washington, D.C. was $300. To Grand Junction, Colorado, it was $600. So why Grand Junction? What's the justification for locating there? No disrespect to my colleagues from Colorado, but there's no major airport there. Denver is 250 miles to the east, Salt Lake, 300 miles to the northwest. No other federal agency is in Grand Junction. And how can Grand Junction be more efficient than someplace else out west, be it Denver or Reno or Fresno?
We have many offices throughout the Mountain West and throughout the 11 western states and Alaska. And one of the touchstones was we don't want to put a national headquarters in where a state office is or maybe a district office is, simply because we want to follow chain of command. We don't want somebody in, say, a Denver or a Cheyenne or a Boise or a Billings going to see the director when they really should be going to see our state director. One of the things that we've sought to maintain with this program is to strengthen the power and the responsibility of our state directors. And we do that by making them the final arbiter of these decisions that affect their states.
No,
we
thanks,
feared putting a national office where one of those state offices is would cause a conflict.
Thank you so much. I mean, when you say you're putting them out in the field, literally, I think you're putting them out left field. Grand Junction, although it's probably a beautiful place, I've never been there. I cannot see how someplace 300 miles from the nearest major airport could be more efficient to the stakeholders. But the fact is, prior to your previous testimony, there has not been a cost-benefit analysis provided to this committee. And we also would like to see the position-by-position analysis that you reference. And so can you commit to providing that to this committee?
Congressman, I'll have to defer to congressional and legislative affairs. I'll submit their question, your question to them for their response.
Thanks very much.
Time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Director Pendley, thank you very much for making time for us today. I'm right over here. So let me ask you a question. Mission statement for the BLM, what is it?
Manage our multiple use resources to the benefit of the American public, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, and where are your resources located? East or west of the Mississippi?
Almost exclusively west of the Mississippi, 245 million acres of land, almost exclusively in the 11 western states and Alaska, sir.
So 99%, almost 99% of that jurisdiction is west of the Mississippi, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, see, the problem we're having here is that the swamp wants to keep centralized control over everything. Instead of what is best is politics that are driven locally. So people feel this. And I'm just going to share a story. Secretary Bernhardt shared a story with us at the Western Caucus in regards to one of the senior BLM employees was excited about this move because this will be the first time he's actually seen sagebrush. How sad is that? That you have jurisdiction over this whole area, and over the multiple decades this man was in service, he had never seen sagebrush. So it tells me a lot. Are you familiar with markets?
Markets?
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer.
I just heard my colleague from California talk about the cost of Grand Junction. So the more you use an airport, do the prices go up or do they usually go down?
Prices go down, sir.
That's what I thought. But that's kind of the distorted view, I guess, we see from California from that aspect. So tell me why Grand Junction. Tell me what deliberative process went through picking and moving this agency. I know we had a lease expiring that was never going to be renewed due to cost. Tell me a little bit how deliberative this process was.
I regret that I can't go into the specifics of that decision, but I have been assured that it was one that was batted around for a couple of years. I mean, this relocation arose beginning with President Trump's executive order mandating that executive agencies reorganize to better serve the American public. We adopted our unified regions in 2018, and the Bureau of Land Management relocation is the next step on that process. You're absolutely right on where the resources are, and you're absolutely right that 97% of our career employees are out there too. What we're talking now is about a scant 3% of whether or not those top executives, the real decision makers, the ones giving advice to the secretary, should they be here on our hallways or should they be out in the field seeing sagebrush for the first time or examining the site. And that's the secretary's opinion that they need to be on the ground. We can solve problems earlier in the process if we see them earlier, if we have meetings, we have more frequent and meaningful engagements with local people. We'll understand local communities better. I've appeared before the Supreme Court of the United States, and one of the things you'll hear advocates at the court always talk about is having been on the site, been to the location, been where the facts of this case arose so that the justices can understand what's happening and the impact it will have. No attorney would appear before the Supreme Court not having done that. And yet, we at the Department of Interior were making decisions based on papers, photographs, and maps, when we really need our experts, our top people in Washington to be on the site, on the location. And that helps them train our future leaders because they're out there on the ground providing them headquarters experience and knowledge and applying that to on-the-ground experience.
So you're telling me that hands-on really is something that is beneficial to the employee as well as to the American people? Absolutely.
It could be not, it's hard to think of anything more important than actually being on the ground and seeing the site. The West is so diverse. There's so much out there, so much to see, and there's so many issues involved. The representative was talking about cultural issues and understanding cultural issues. You just can't get it if you haven't been there, if you're not there. And we have decision makers in Washington who are over on M Street and haven't been on the ground, and they need to be out there better serving the American people.
So I'm going to end with this. Grand Junction seems like it came out of left field. But in fact, it actually is not. I mean, because we don't see the big city corruption in Grand Junction. I'm very familiar. I actually have family that lives in Grand Junction. It's very centrally located. So there's a big benefit to having the ability that these workers are dependent upon that interaction with the surroundings that they serve. Is that true?
Well, I absolutely believe it. I live in Evergreen, Colorado. That's my home, has been my home for some 30-some years. I look out on Mount Evans, 14,000 foot, and, I wouldn't trade that for anything. It beats the heck out of the view out of my studio apartment here in Washington, D.C. And I dare say people going out to Grand Junction will love what they see.
Especially when you hear that elk whistle.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Goose? Time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this important hearing. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to to talk about these issues. Thank you, Mr. Pendley, for your service to our country. It's an honor to be able to represent you as a constituent. I represent the great area of Evergreen, as well as the Western Jefferson County and a number of other counties in the 2nd Congressional District in Colorado. I would just want to say a couple of things. Obviously, as a member from Colorado on this committee, this is a particularly important issue to me, and I want to reiterate a comment that I made many times before in this committee, and that's Colorado is home to world-class research institutions, labs, scientists that I'm confident would do outstanding work for the BLM. Providing the best science for any agency is a good thing. With much respect to my colleague from the state of California, I would defend Grand Junction is a wonderful place, a wonderful community, a robust city, as I know my colleague from the 3rd Congressional District is certainly well aware, and I know the people there would certainly do a wonderful job at the BLM in supporting the BLM's work. Now, all that being said, obviously there's some important questions that have been raised by members of this committee and elsewhere in the Congress, and those are important questions, and it's important for the director to be able to come in and answer those. I want to focus just on 2 particular areas. The first is with respect to just public lands in general. Director Pendley, this is the first opportunity we've had to have you before the committee since you took your position. In 2016, you wrote an article titled, "The Federal Government Should Follow the Constitution and Sell Its Western Lands." And I guess I want to give you an opportunity to disavow that article, that is no longer your belief, because obviously that causes a lot of alarm for those of us who care deeply about public lands and ensuring that they be maintained for the use and enjoyment of future generations, which is the mission statement of the BLM, I should say, per your website.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, Congressman, I appreciate the
Not a
opportunity.
chairman yet, but that's a long way to go, but
Exactly. Excuse me. Congressman, I appreciate the opportunity to respond. I love America's public lands. I have never advocated the wholesale disposal or transfer of those lands. And more importantly, as a loyal and proud member of the Trump administration, I support the President and Secretary Bernhardt in their crystal clear opposition to the wholesale disposal or transfer of public lands.
I'm just going to stop you there.
Let me just say...
No, I'm going to stop you there, Director Pendley, because you mentioned that in your opening statement. And
Yes,
so
sir.
I guess I
want to
have
return
limited time. I've got another question I want to get to. This notion of continuing to use the phrase wholesale,
Yes.
to me, is a qualifier
Yes, sir.
that I don't think is appropriate.
Well-
it sounds as though you're denoting that
It's not equivalent.
some sale of the lands is appropriate, and we fundamentally disagree on that point. So,
Well, if I can respond, please. It is not a quibble. The point is Congress makes decisions about the disposal of lands. You provide the BLM, for example, authority to dispose of lands, for example, for educational purposes or for landlocked circumstances or for other reasons. And when Congress makes the decision to do that, then we'll salute and we'll do it, we'll obey. So that's the wholesale part. There may be case-specific circumstances where we do transfer or dispose, but Congress is the boss under the property clause, and it'll tell us when we can do that, sir.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. To that point, there was an article, I believe, earlier this week. Representative Cox quoted it, referenced it in E&E. The title is BLM Staffers Group Relocation Plans in Closed-Door Meeting. I want to ask you about the piece of the article referencing congressional oversight. And there's an exchange in this article, I will just quote from it. Quote, Pendley also referenced $5.6 million that Congress appropriated in the current budget cycle for the relocation. It's there, and we intend to utilize it, believing that there will be sufficient, and we are confident that Congress will provide additional funding as the process advances in the months ahead, he said.
Yes.
That answer seemed to rile employees, one of whom said that she understands Congress holds the, quote, power of the purse strings, and that employees need more than assurances from Pendley, quote, that the Secretary believes or the Secretary is confident, end quote, Congress will fund the relocation. Here's why it matters. Here's why I'm referencing this. Is you mentioned a few times that you are a, quote, loyal member of the Trump administration. Yes. And I guess, obviously right now, we are enmeshed in this Congress in a very big debate about the administration's efforts ongoing to steal money from military appropriations and defense projects very important to the state of Colorado, to use those to build a border wall. And I just hope that you understand and the BLM understands, for those who support this move and for those who don't, that the Congress has a role to play. And it's going to be important for the BLM to work in tandem with the Appropriations Subcommittee Chair, Representative McCollum, as well as the Chair of the Authorizing Committee, that's Mr. Grijalva, as you move forward with this plan. And so I just want to make sure we reiterate that. Happy to give you a chance to respond, although I see my time has expired.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman? Or, thank you very much. I get it. We understand, and that's why we're here, because we believe that we can persuade you, the committee, and Congress that this makes sense, that it makes sense for the American people, it makes sense for the Bureau of Land Management and its employees, and we know at the end of the day, you hold the purse strings. And we understand that. But I was asked by that employee to speculate on what might happen. I knew two things. One, that Congress had decided to give us 5.6, and the Secretary had made a decision to utilize that to move, and so we're on with the march. And we're hoping to be persuasive that this makes a tremendous amount of sense. It'll benefit economically in the long run, but it will be more than just economically beneficial. It will make for the wise use of our natural resources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being here. I want to welcome Mr. Tipton back with us again. It's good to have you here. How can we put him down in the beginner seats? You could sit with the real people if you wanted to. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I've got your back, that's for sure. Mr. Pendley, thank you for being here. Let me go through some of the blinding obvious questions very quickly again. There are those who are still saying that if this move takes place, there are those who will lose a seat at the table. I'm supposed to ask you, is that a bogus claim? But I'm going to ask you, why is that such a silly bogus claim?
Well, I don't know who could possibly lose a seat at the table. I think this is a win-win all around. I think it's a win for our people in the field, who will have our best experts coming to the field to provide leadership and guidance and supervision and to train our next group of leaders. I think people who remain here in Washington, D.C. will have a proximity to the Secretary of the Interior and the Deputy Secretary that's unprecedented in the history of the Bureau.
So let me help you out with this. What you're saying is you don't have to actually be in point X to make decisions that are wise, as long as you understand the areas in which you're talking about. So if we have the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, we have the firefighters in Boise, they can still function just as well. And if indeed one believes in the principle of propinquity, first of all, you're down by Nat Stadium, right? Which is certainly a hell of a lot better than going back to the Interior Department. You should probably stay there. But I understand that's going to be really expensive property down there. And what remains after this transfer would be moved back here with the rest of the department. So if you actually believe in the rule of propinquity, it's a win-win situation from that.
Well, we have a deadline. It seems a long way away, December 31st, 2020, but it's soon. And we've got to make plans about how to use that, what to do with those employees. And our plan is to put them in the main Interior building, and the others we're going to put in the field so they can better serve the American public.
So at least stay there through the playoffs. That's a wise thing to do at the same process.
Thank you.
Let me come back with some of the other things that we have talked about. It was brought up how much it costs to fly from Grand Junction. I'm assuming there were other factors when you came up with the decision that dealt with the cost of each area, which would also include the cost of housing, cost of living, school element, where it would be possible. Did you consider all of those factors, not simply the price of an airline ticket?
I'm advised all of those factors were considered. I'll tell you what we're looking at right now with regard to cost per square foot. We're looking at between $28 and $30 per square foot for our new headquarters in Grand Junction, Colorado. We're paying $50 or more per square foot at our M Street location, even if we could obtain that, and that's our calculation for the main Interior building as well. We will have to build out with regard to some of our locations in Reno or Carson City or Salt Lake City or Santa Fe or Albuquerque, but there we're looking at costs between $14 and $20 or $8 or $30 a square foot. So it's much more economic to be there. It's a lower cost of living. Our dollars go further and our people are close to the resource.
All right, and one of the things I think we've forgotten in this entire discussion is that you're not just moving everything to Grand Junction. I appreciate you taking all those factors into into consideration. You still should have been in Utah. But Grand Junction is not necessarily where everyone is going to go.
Oh,
You're also moving people to New Mexico, you're moving people to Arizona, to Nevada, over to Utah, up to Idaho, where their function can be better enhanced by being in those local particular areas. So this is not just a wholesale move from Nat Stadium to Grand Junction. You're covering the entire West, and you're going to allow a greater expertise and a greater experience throughout the entire area in which you find BLM lands, right?
That's absolutely the case. We have 74 people going to various state offices to perform state office functions. We have 222 people going to state office to perform headquarters functions. Nearly every, well, not nearly, every Western state will benefit from an infusion of experts.
Benefit, and I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Just you don't send ours to Salt Lake. That's the only thing you have to remember. Let me go with one other thing here too. In addition, I'm sorry, that was my ad. In addition to all of that stuff, historically what we are doing is trying to understand how land, if you really care about your land, you got to take care of it. So in the 1860s, historically we started the Homesteading Act. And I'm quoting from Dr. Nelson, University of Maryland now, who's done a lot of studies as far as the history of land management, land decisions. Almost all of those homesteading acts, which I think the last one was like 1912, 1916 that was attempted, failed. And in his analysis, it failed for one reason. The people making decisions on those lands lived thousands of miles away from the land in which they were trying to adjudicate. That's what you are trying to say in here, is the land is out in the West, not just in Nevada, but it's in the entire West. Moving people closer to that will make a better decision, and we have historical evidence of doing that. If you want to say something, I'm over, but hell, so is everybody.
Absolutely, the chairman will allow. My response is simply, we want to be a good neighbor, and we cannot be a good neighbor if we're not first a neighbor. And so we need our employees to be neighbors so they can be good neighbors and serve our communities, our states in the West, but also serve the American people.
Thank you. I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your answers, and somebody else is going to have to ask you about consultation.
Thank you.
What about
Did you say me, Mr. Chairman?
Ann? Okay.
Am I up, Mr. Chairman? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Pendley, thank you over here.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for being here today. And listen, I very much appreciate this administration's efforts to drain the swamp and to help push as much of the federal workforce outside the D.C. Beltway. I think this is a great idea. And Mr. Chairman, appreciate us having this hearing today to discuss this. You've stated that, in your opinion, relocating BLM leadership closer to the activities and places, states, will provide a greater understanding of the needs on the ground in those various states and regions, and facilitate, as a result, more meaningful policies. So I'd like to just go further on the discussion that's already been taking place. How will the American people be able to visualize and experience some of the, how they themselves, how Americans are going to be better served if the leadership and the resources are moved closer to the actual places that are impacted and involved with BLM?
Congressman, I think one of the ways is better decision-making earlier in the process. None of us like the logjam that we've seen, for example, with National Environmental Policy Act, where we have endless litigation and makes it difficult for our rubber to hit the road, and whether we're doing a recreational project or grazing renewal or oil and gas operations, whatever we're doing, they get bogged down. And one of the things the Secretary has done is force those decisions out into the field with Secretarial Order 3355 to shorten our NEPA process and get it done right. And one of the ways we can most effectively do that is having our top people in the field, to have them close to the resource, to have them making decisions not based on paper or photographs or maps, but actually being on the ground, We're going to have early problem solving. We're going to understand the Western communities. We're going to have more frequent and meaningful conversations with our stakeholders. And I think it's going to inform our decision-making process. The beneficiary will be the American people, because whatever decisions we're making, whether it's a recreational issue or a logging issue, a mining issue, or energy, or land transfer as ordered by Congress, we're going to do it more expeditiously. We're going to do it with local input, and we're going to get the decision made more promptly.
So the policy side of things will be beneficial. I'd like to go a little bit further on where Chairman Bishop, ranking member, was just talking some of the savings to the American taxpayer as well. Obviously, I would think this has to be a significant savings in multiple ways to the American taxpayer. But you mentioned where the BLM is currently located on M Street. Did I hear you correctly? It's $50 per square foot?
It's $50. That's what we're being told.
$50.
And it's going to be north of $50 a square foot. We're paying $4 million a year for that space.
All right, that's what I wanted to get to, some of the totals. So $4 million where you currently are, and in Colorado, it'd be, did you say 38?
We're looking at 28 to 30, sir.
28 to 30.
$28 to $30 per square foot, yes.
And so what would that total be?
Well, we're looking at 10,000 square feet. We're looking at $280,000 to $300,000 for now. Now we're not going to have 350 people there. Right now we're going to have 27 people there. But still, and again, it's going to be a substantial savings per person. We're also going to save on locality pay. The extra costs we pay employees when they're in a high cost of living location. We're also going to save significantly on travel. We're going to have shorter trips. We're going to make more efficient trips. I think we're going to find people making shorter trips and even drives operating in the same time zone. And of course, as one of the members has already stated, we're in a new technological world. We don't have to be just down the hall from somebody to be in full communication with them. What we need to do, though, is we need to be on the ground with those resources.
Excellent. I think that's an extremely great point, and a lot of benefit to the taxpayer. Last question, I'll let you wrap up with this. Going with the consultation with local partners, what has taken place and what is the attitude of the locals?
I've not been able to be out west as often as I want, but I will tell you what the Secretary's response is and what Joe Bailash, when he was here, and also our Deputy Assistant Secretary Casey Hammond's response is, he says, each one of them says every time I go out west and meet with local leaders, they say, we're so thankful that you're sending your folks out here, that you're going to have an increased presence. I will tell you consistently what we have heard, and I know you have heard it because you oversee what we do, and that is we don't have the resources and the people we need in our state, district, and field offices. We're going to put them there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pendley, welcome. You had a majority of our Colorado congressional delegation here this morning, and I think we could all agree on a bipartisan basis, and we would agree with you. Any day in Colorado's a better day than when we have to be here. I think we'll all four of us agree with that. And I also agree with you that you really need to see what's on the ground when you're dealing with Western land management issues. And that's why you probably know I've got a wilderness bill for Colorado that we are looking at this fall in this committee, which has a number of areas of BLM, wilderness study areas, and other that we're thinking about making permanent. And I do want to commend the BLM, which has been working with us quite well on map development and so on. And that really goes to the questions I wanted to ask you about the BLM staffing, because it's one thing to move the BLM to Grand Junction, Colorado. And being from Denver, I'll say the only thing I disagree with was when Mr. Gosar said big cities were corrupt and little cities weren't, because I don't agree with that. I think every place in Colorado is wonderful. But my question is, just moving the office to Grand Junction is not necessarily going to solve some of the staffing issues we have at the BLM. And I want to ask you about that. Recently, it was reported that there are 323 positions at the BLM theoretically being moved to the western states. But right now, there's only 177 staff in those positions. They haven't been filled. And in addition, the BLM estimates that at least 45 of those 177 positions will either retire or leave the agency for other jobs because they don't want to have to move, which I certainly don't understand that. So in the meantime, I was in Mr. Tipton's hometown of Cortez over the August recess, looking at some of my wilderness areas in that area, and working with the Trace Rios office, BLM office down there. They are also short-staffed. They have an acting director down there. They have many staff vacancies, and they were not really able to, I mean, they worked hard to help support my visit down there, but they didn't have a lot of the information that having a steady, long-term staff down there would have had. And so I'm not just sure moving the headquarters solves these problems. And as you know, having been a lawyer, there are a lot of issues that the BLM staff in these regional offices need to address. Development of oil and gas and mineral leases in BLM lands. Recreation plans, especially in places like Colorado, but throughout the West. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, that's a longer question than I usually ask, but what I'd like to hear from you is how you, do you think that simply moving the office to Grand Junction and other points in the West will solve these staffing problems? And number two, what is the BLM's longer-term plan for filling these positions with qualified personnel?
Absolutely, great questions, and I don't want to conflate things. The move to Grand Junction with our headquarters and the 27 slots that are allocated there is one thing. The other part of that is the 222 that are going to be relocated from the headquarters through the various state offices to perform headquarters functions, and then the 74 that are going to be allocated state office to state office functions.
So that's great, but that still doesn't fill the vacancies
I understand.
throughout the agency,
Exactly.
not just at the headquarters level.
Exactly. I totally understand, and part of the problem is simply that we have not been able to staff up because we're trying to staff up in Washington, and we need to be able to fill those slots. And I think offering people an opportunity to live in and work in the West will overcome a part of those problems.
Actually, though, 45 of those people said they're going, of this 177 you have now, they said they're not going to move to the West.
All right.
Do you have people in the West who are qualified who say they're going to take that job?
If I could slightly correct that statement, that is an estimate that our policy, budget, and management people made, calculating that typically 25%.
Did they find 25% that want to go there?
No, it's simply a rough calculation. Okay, we've got to make some numbers. We're going to try to get a number to provide Congress. What's our PCS code?
I understand. Did they get the number on the other side of how many more people would want to come in? Do you have that number?
I don't have that number.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm from Utah's 3rd Congressional District, and I've always imagined that we were BLM's favorite district until this recent decision, and now I'm content to say I'm your 2nd favorite district. Interestingly,
3rd.
This is my time. Interesting, my district is only 33 minutes away from Grand Junction in Utah.
Awesome.
The furthest part of my district is 5 hours away from Grand Junction. So you can imagine, although we would love to have it in Utah, the pleasure of my counties down in that part of my district to learn of your decision. I was recently down in that part of my district, and every time I'm there, I consistently hear, we love our BLM agents on the ground, and we're really frustrated with those 2,000 miles away. It's just this repeated theme. There's this sense that they don't understand what they're dealing with and the decisions that they're making, how they impact them. So this decision is met with great pleasure throughout my district. They're really excited to have you there. Looking forward to having those making decisions right there near them in their daily lives. And I'd like to mention two things just quickly. One of them is likely on your radar and one would not be. The Emery County Public Lands Bill recently passed with the large lands package this year. Requires a ton of work from BLM, and I just want to thank your good people for the work they've done and get that on your radar. A lot of work still needs to be done
Yes.
on the ground there. And the second thing is, this is a small thing here in Washington, but here again, a very large thing back in the district. During my visit, I visited a canyon called 9 Mile Canyon. It's full of antiquities from the Fremont Indians. Unbelievable treasures throughout that canyon. They've been working for years with BLM to get signage in that canyon and have been unsuccessful simply because of lack of resources. So I wanted to get that on your radar so we could follow up with your staff and see if any chance that we could expedite that.
Thank you.
And with that, I have no more questions, but I would like to yield to my colleague from Utah, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. I appreciate that. And I realized you share the border with that part of Colorado, and it's a great area. Mr. Pendley, I would like to ask one question simply because one of the attorneys wrote testimony in here saying there were no consultations with Native Americans. Is that accurate?
I do not believe it is accurate. I'm advised that we did engage in consultation with tribal leaders with regard to a multiple set of issues, especially, for example, the unified region decision that was made and the recommendation from tribal leaders, the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Education, and our special trustee. And I know for a fact that because of our on-the-ground activities and working with tribes through for example, these tribal energy resource agreements, and I'm not just focusing on energy issues, but simply that's a big issue for many of the tribes. It was an issue for this Congress that they need our on-the-ground ability to help them out on those issues, and having people there in the West and not here in Washington is the solution in my view.
Thank you, and I would like to introduce for the record also the letter that Assistant Secretary Sweeney sent to Mr. Grijalva explaining what the process was, and indeed there were 11 formal consultation sessions, an additional 7 listening sessions. I know some people have said that that's not proper type of consultation, which is a word I don't know if anywhere is actually defined of what proper is, but do you think 11 formal consultations, 7 additional listening sessions, having the transcript of all of those for public comment, and then the feedback that you got from individual views, do you think you actually did due diligence in going through this consultation process?
Absolutely.
I think I do too, so does the letter that was sent there. So if I could have this put in the record. Thank you, and thank you for once again your indulgence, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being in attendance here today. I am deeply concerned with the Department of Interior's proposal for the reorganization and relocation of the Bureau of Land Management headquarters from Washington, D.C. to Grand Junction, Colorado. To me, this proposal seems to be a continuation of the Trump administration's effort to drain the swamp, which oftentimes becomes including and adding to the alligators, which in reality is an attempt to push out career employees and weaken federal agencies. This is a dangerous move, one that not only disrespects federal employees and their dedication to public service, but also threatens to rid federal agencies of institutional knowledge and devoted civil servants. This proposal has not taken into account external or internal stakeholders. Agency personnel have not been consulted and were only given notice of this proposal when it was released to the public. Winning political points should never take precedent in decision-making over working toward the mission of the protection of our federal public lands and our service to the American people. These decisions must be fully examined, since any detrimental effect will be felt for years and possibly generations to come. So, Acting Director Pendley, one of DOI's rationales for this reorganization is to enhance coordination with partners and stakeholders. What evidence or analyses do you have that show the spreading headquarters staff and teams across 12 offices will improve coordination?
Well, we hear consistently from members of Congress, governors, Western leaders, stakeholders, our partners in the field, is simply that we don't have the staffing we need in the field offices and the state offices to be responsive and to understand fully their problems and their concerns. And we're being responsive to that by putting our best experts in the field so they can join with the people who are already there to make better decisions earlier in the process in a more timely way.
But how is that, I hear the effort to put people on the ground in certain regions and understand the benefit of that, but how is that enhancing coordination? It seems to me you have more locations, so the coordination effort becomes even more difficult.
Well, having our employees 2 time zones closer reduces the geographic barriers that we have right now because they're in the Mountain West, or they're in the Western states. They're available to the stakeholders and the shareholders and the various constituents and partners that we have. They're a short flight away or they're a drive away. They're available for those consultations. I think we're going to have more frequent and meaningful conversations. I think our leaders will have a better understanding of Western communities, and I sincerely believe we're going to have earlier decision-making and problem-solving earlier in the process. Instead of it getting all the way back to Washington over to M Street or at headquarters, those problems would have been solved by on-the-ground experience with our experts from Washington, D.C. I sincerely believe this will strengthen the agency. I must say, I have been mightily impressed with the career people that I work with. They have been tremendously, and I'm speaking on substantive issues. I'm not talking relocation here, but on substantive issues, whether it's energy or recreation or donations to the department, or, for example, trying to apprehend people shooting burros in the California desert. I have been mightily impressed with the professionalism, the expertise, the knowledge, the responsiveness of the career people who work for the Bureau of Land Management. I could not be more pleased with their work and their performance. I don't want to lose a single one of them, and that's my effort. I'm not trying to drain the swamp. I'm trying to make it more possible for them to do their job.
I agree with you, and I do understand their professionalism, and I do respect it, and I don't want it to be disrespected or to have morale deflated. So I'd like to direct your attention to the screens for some graphics that I think demonstrate the enhanced coordination. Are you concerned that there are only 4 states with direct flights to Grand Junction?
No, sir.
Well, let the slides speak for themselves. How does that enhance coordination for folks from the other 39 states who could previously fly direct to D.C. and meet with staff?
Well, I think many of them will not necessarily be going to Grand Junction. They'll be going to other state offices. We're going to put 222 people. We're going to put another 74 people in these state offices, and those are the people that folks will be visiting. What we're sending to Grand Junction right now is our headquarters, 27 people. I think there'll be a need to come and see the director there, the deputy director for operations there, but I think most of the people are going to want to travel to a state office and sit down with an assistant director for a specific area. Be it recreation, be it energy, be it wild horse and burros.
Well, I still think my concerns for coordination have not been responded to. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think I've exhausted my time, so I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pendley, thank you so much for being here today and testifying. You know, as a steward of taxpayer dollars, I think that people who live on the land, live around the land, have a lot more credibility, will be a better, be more responsible government employee in the sense that they will be able to relate very closely with those folks in these field offices that you're talking about. You know, it concerns me. I've heard kind of mixed comments from my colleagues across the aisle today, some commending the move in a sense and just asking to be sure and work together with Congress, and others being critical and making it a political ploy. Anything that downsizes the scope and the size of Washington, D.C. is somehow seem to be destroying America. It is amazing to me. I've only been here for about 10 months. It's amazing to me the size of Washington, D.C., and I have a hard time finding a time when there was ever a recession in this city. There are tower cranes everywhere in building, and it seems we want to concentrate more and more power here for us to, as a government, to want to actually move some people out of here to get them closer to the issues. There's probably not a better example than the BLM. When you look at, as we've talked about a lot, 99% of the federal lands that you're responsible for are west of the Mississippi, and I would say even west of Kansas, and to move it into the heart is, I think, a very sound move. As a person that's been in business my entire life before coming to Congress, decisions are always made better when they're closer to what they have to manage. So I applaud you and the administration for wanting to do this. Should have been done a long time ago, whether it been Democrat or Republican. It shouldn't have mattered, and we should be trying to get our decision-making and policy-making processes closer to where the issues are. And so I really look forward to working with you and the department as we move forward to do anything we can to help make that happen. And hopefully the political fights can be set aside for this, what I would call a good move in all of this. And again, my colleagues across the aisle, many are in support of this. And so they've asked for some concerns, whether it's hiring practices or whatever it may be. But I would think that it would be much easier to even hire in those areas for people who have grave concerns for what's going on in their mind that want to be a part of a solution. And that's the reason I ran for office. When you have concerns, you have an opportunity to go get engaged. And so I think you'll have a very receptive employee base in Grand Junction that will want to work and help solidify the positions that the BLM is advocating for our federal lands. So I really applaud you for that. You know, I'm sure that you either have done or are working on not just a justification financially for the move, beyond decision-making, but I have to believe that in perpetuity, this process will save a lot of money for the federal government going forward. And I think, and I would hope that all of us in here, with our deficits running $1 trillion a year, our debt at $23 trillion, that we'd all want to do a piece of this in a very bipartisan solution to help save money anywhere we can and make great decisions. And this is one that I applaud you on. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any other questions. I could ask the same questions and be very redundant in asking Mr. Pendley to respond to them. But Mr. Pendley, have you, I guess just one question would be, have you looked at a long-term 20-year approach or 50-year approach to what the savings would be to the government?
Well, our Office of Management and Budget has looked at it and projected out a $90 million savings over a 20-year period. I can't speak specifically to those numbers, but that's their calculation. You know, I think the bottom line is the Secretary's decision it was not driven by the numbers. It was driven by maximizing service to the American people and delegating our responsibilities out to the field where decisions need to be made and increasing our presence out there. But I think we will benefit by savings, and whether it's aviation costs or flight costs or travel costs or location pay or rentals, it's all going to affect the bottom line.
If I might add to that, we saw the slide up there about flights from Dulles, which most of us don't fly out of, by the way. I'd like to see Reagan put up there. But you know, the reason those are that way is because all the power in the federal government is concentrated here, which has driven the need for those flights. If you move certain flight or businesses or departments somewhere else, there'll be flights driven to those areas as well, correct? To certain areas, whether it be Salt Lake or wherever, California, there'll be direct flights to those as well.
That's my understanding of how the market works.
That's my colleague reminded us of that earlier. If there's a need, we'll be there. Thank you. I'll yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Who's next? Mr. Fulcher? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, will shorten things up because there's no sense in being redundant on some of these questions. But I can just tell you that I spent the last 5 weeks, Mr. Pendley, in my district in Idaho, and received quite a few positive comments about that. And so I think the perception is generally good where the rubber meets the road. I would say I did get one question that I wasn't quite certain how to answer, so I will just forward that to you to try to get your input on it. And it was one of the concerned people said that Grand Junction is a long ways away from the appropriators in Washington, D.C. And I'm assuming that they're concerned about budget and the amount of budget appropriation that the department would get and so on. What's the best response to that question?
Well, the best response is our core headquarters responsibilities, and that includes budget and congressional affairs, regulatory affairs, and public affairs, and our FOIA duties are all still here in Washington. And they're not just in Washington, they're not at M Street, they're down the hall from the secretary and the deputy secretary and our decision makers. We're going to be able to be responsive to the Congress. We're going to be able to be responsive to OMB and to the secretary. And I think our BLM employees involved in that area are going to have more interaction with the secretary and the deputy secretary than ever before in the history of the Bureau. I think it's going to strengthen their learning experience.
Thank you. And just maybe a comment as opposed to another question here, but I come from the business world, and that's my background in business, and I know it's different than government, but it's very, very common to have regional leadership, regional vice presidents based on geography, based on markets, and so on and so forth. So from that standpoint, it's certainly common. And I do recall, though, that when we would do that, when the company got larger, when we would do that type of thing, those who were in opposition to it often were the ones who were afraid about losing control. And I would also say that if you're from a western state and you're a long ways away from Washington, D.C., and you have a tremendous amount of federal resources that you're dependent upon, what you want to do is you want to localize that to some extent. And so generally, I think I agree with the majority of my constituency that I think it's a wise move. So just appreciate the help. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yield back. Yield my time to Mr. Curtis, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd just like to express a regret that I wasn't the one that thought of putting up that chart on airlines, because I would have used that chart to show how hard it is to get from all of those cities to Washington, D.C. And the reality of it is we're here to serve, and we shouldn't ask them to come to us. We should be going to them. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you.
Yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Penn, some questions for myself. I'm curious about some of the position moves that were determined. The data that we received from the department shows that 4 legislative affairs specialists are slated to move to Reno, Nevada, and the Bureau's international affairs specialist, the person in the Bureau that coordinates with the State Department and foreign governments, is being moved to Salt Lake City. Could you explain how it was determined that these were the best locations for them?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that we are not sending congressional liaison employees to the West. We're going to have our congressional liaison people here. We also sought to work with individual employees as to their particular needs.
Okay.
And with the locations to which they're being assigned.
Then at the briefing with your staff that staff received, that was the information we had gotten?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I want to be, excuse me, I want to be precise. Let me submit that, if you would, sir, for the record, and I'll get a response to you so we can be on point.
Yeah, the associated question, is there a national legislature that's forming in Reno that none of us here know about? With that, let me just, the other couple of questions. Has the Department of Interior done any surveys or analysis on how many people might leave the agency if they're forced to relocate to the West, in this case?
No, we've done no studies on that.
And the 45 staff was, from your testimony, was an estimate?
It's my understanding that was a projection based on historical data of the number of people who are eligible for retirement and typically retire. I'm advised that most BLM employees do not retire when eligible, but stick around for another 5 years. And we're hoping that
Thank you.
What we're trying to do with the employees will cause them to stick around, especially if they have the opportunity
Any analysis,
somewhere in the West.
Mr. Director, any analysis been done to show how this particular move, the impacts on BLM staff, particularly in the areas in which there's been efforts to diversify the staff, women, people of color that are over the age of 40, what that retention is going to be like?
Bureau of Land Management has a very robust diversity and inclusiveness program.
But we have no analysis to
I've presided over 2 of those briefing sessions, and we're committed to diversity and inclusiveness, and we will continue to work on that issue. We will not allow it to fall by the wayside just simply because we're moving west.
And I'm assuming that any analysis dealing with the loss of institutional knowledge or memory relative to the moves, there has been no analysis done in terms of what impact that will have?
No, Mr. Chairman, no analysis simply because we're hoping these people will stay with us. We are hoping that we'll provide sufficient
Of the
inducements.
9,000 employees, what percentage are not in DC?
I believe 97% are not in DC. That's, we're talking about 3% and a part of that 3%. And the part of the 3% is the part that works on the lands out west, the 245 million acres that we manage. Those who work on issues that are core Washington, D.C. functions, they will remain.
And let me just, and thank you, I think you clarified it in your testimony, Director. In the opening statement, I mentioned Chief of Staff Mulvaney's comments about draining the swamp, forcing career public servants out of work. He made it clear he thinks that taking steps that get federal employees to quit is a positive thing. From your testimony, you disagree with that. Am I misreading your testimony on that point?
I can only speak for myself and the Secretary, and our position is we do not want to lose a single employee.
So you disagree with the Chief of Staff's point on that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can just speak for my staff, myself and my Secretary, and we're doing everything we can, and the Secretary's authorizing me to do everything we can to retain employees.
And, you know, with the lingering doubts, Mr. Director, questions, objections to this move, reorganization, in quotes, comes from a lack of prior information to the committee and to Congress in terms of any analysis, justifications, rationale, the lack of information, and the issue that was brought up by my colleagues around the tribal consultation issue, and the issues that was brought up about cost-benefit analysis, and the other analysis points that I made. I think that suspicions about motivation in terms of why this move is going on, and they abound, as they should, given the fact there's been no transparency on it. And to this date, the full justification, rationale, data, whatever could be produced has not been produced for the committee. And so, i.e. this hearing, you brought some perspective to it, and you clarified the point about not agreeing with the Chief of Staff of the White House. But beyond that, I think those questions continue to linger, and we're going to continue to press the point about getting responses to that, sir. Let me move to the members that are present with us. Ms. Holmes Norton, you had some questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate the opportunity to ask my questions here. Mr. Pendley, I believe we see a pattern here. In the FY 2020 appropriation, I have an amendment that would block movement of 2 USDA offices out of the nation's capital. So there's a pattern of this administration to move even vital parts of the administration out of the district, the nation's capital. As I understand it, your entire, first of all, 97% of the agency is where it should be, in the field. This is different from other agencies. So we're talking about very few employees that are necessary for this committee, for the Congress of the United States, for the President of the United States to be informed. Let me ask you about coordination. I'm concerned not only with the Congress, but with virtually nobody left in D.C., it looks like the entire directorate would be gone with no leadership presence in D.C. One wonders how the BLM would coordinate with other agencies, such as Fish and Wildlife, such as the Department of Defense, such as the U.S. Forest Service, such as the National Park Services, all apart. of what you need in order to fulfill your mission? How are you going to do that with virtually no leadership here in the District of Columbia?
Representative, I'll be here. The Deputy Director for Policy and Programs will be here, as will our Congressional, Regulatory Affairs, our Public Affairs, FOIA, and Budget people.
How many people will be left in the...
61. But significantly, our partners in the field, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Department of Defense, all of those have operations in the field with whom our state offices coordinate.
And they all have directions from Washington and do not have their entire staff being moved to the field. Look, I don't object at all to the fact that almost everybody in Fish and BLM is in the field. I think it is where it should be. But I am looking at history and wonder if you have looked at recent history of movement of BLM staff. In the 1990s, the BLM moved its wildlife staff out west, but they had to move them back in during the wildfires because Congress made you do so, because they were unable to do any oversight on the wildfires. Have you looked at that history, sir?
It's my understanding that in the 2000s, we moved our deputy director and our assistant directors and our staff all out to Boise to best handle the wildlife fire issue. That's a huge issue for the Bureau of Land Management. 70% of our firefighting forces at the Department of the Interior are BLM employees. That's crucial to our operations. And we're keen on getting our human resources, human capital resources
My point only, sir, was that you had
to Grand Junction.
My point only was, and my time is running out, is you had to move people back to Washington because we, the Congress of the United States, also have to do oversight. Have you looked at the history of what this same movement has done to USDA? They have experienced a 71% loss of staff. That's top scientists, people who knew the agencies best. You say, the only answers I've heard from you is you hoping staff will stay. Here's the evidence. When you have to move your top people with all the experience out of the nation's capital, you lose people. Have you taken that into consideration? Have you made a survey of your staff to say how many of you would remain if we move to Grand Junction?
A week from today, we're going to notify the people of what specific positions are being relocated. We'll be sitting down with those employees, our human resources people, our employment assistance people.
Would you do a canvas at that time to find out how many of your employees, people who've been with you a long time, people who build in all the expertise, would you, to this committee, promise to have before this committee a survey of staff so that the committee will have information on how many will refuse and how many will be glad to move to Grand Junction?
We're going to be meeting with people one-on-one. We're going to be meeting with family members. We're going to asking their personal needs and being responsive to those needs. I don't think we can provide that information because that's going to be a one-on-one employee-to-employee discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tipton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pendley, thank you for taking the time to be able to be here. Happens to be in my district, where the headquarters for the BLM will be located, and I appreciate a lot of the explanations that you're giving, and did want Mr. Chairman to be able to submit for the record without objection a letter from Colorado Mesa University and the president there, Mr. Tim Foster, applauding the move and encouraging it to Grand Junction. Thank you. A lot of the concerns that I've actually heard here today and wanted to be able to sit in on this hearing was about some of the logistics that are going on. I'd echo a few of the words that were coming from my counterpart, Mr. Curtis, whose district butts up against mine in the state of Utah, the difficulty to be able to get to Washington from the majority of the country. We're going to have another panel that's going to be sitting here, and we have the economic developer out of Mesa County, where Grand Junction is located. It's going to be talking about the efforts of the community to be able to actually work with the BLM to be able to address some of the flight concerns. But here's the real concern.
Yes, sir.
And the real concern is, are we getting the real response out of Washington, D.C. with the people that are making the decisions on the impacts on the lands in the West? When we look at the 99% of the public lands that are in the western United States, when we look at Mesa County, 78% of those are public lands. 46% of those, I believe, are actually BLM lands. Is it going to be useful to be able to actually have the decision makers actually on the ground? When I've toured through my district, there are a lot of bouquets that are given out to the local BLM officials, Forest Service representatives as well, those that deal with the public lands. But the frustration ultimately is separation between Washington, D.C. and the West, and how those are handled. Could you maybe speak to that issue? I think that's the important thing that we need to be focusing on.
Absolutely, and I could not agree more. Nothing beats being on the ground. Nothing beats seeing something up close and personal. We cannot be a good neighbor. We're committed to being a good neighbor. We cannot be a good neighbor if we're not first a neighbor. And it just totally changes someone's perspective when they're living out west. These are the people they meet at the Albertsons or church or wherever they happen to be, that they know up close and personal, and not just because they're the BLM person, but because they live down the block or they live in the next town over. And having them on the ground, we can truly have a better appreciation for our Western communities. We have more meaningful conversations and engagements, and we can solve problems earlier in the process instead of all of a sudden some county commissioners have to fly out to Washington, D.C. and sit down with the deputy director or some assistant director and say, this is really going to mess us up. We will have had those people right there meeting with the commissioners, meeting with the locals and understanding it. They'll not be sending that problem to Washington. It'll be solved locally.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Chairman, I want to be respectful of the committee's time. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate, and I know we have another panel, and I yield back.
For your valuable testimony, sir. Appreciate it. To the members for their questions. And at this point, invite panel 2 to take their places at the witness table. For the second panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes. Your entire statement will be part of the hearing record, and the lights in front of you will guide you. When they turn yellow, that means you have 1 minute left, and when it's red, your time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Take a little break.
Take your time. Take your time.
How are you? Good. How are you? Robin Brown. Tony Small. Yeah. Everyone took off when we came up.
Thank you all so much for being here. The chair will now recognize Dr. John Freemuth, Distinguished Professor of Public Policy and the Cecil Andrus Endowed Chair of Environment and Public Lands at Boise State University. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Go Broncos.
Thank you. I was going to say that, Sure, graduate of Boise State. Good to see you. Let me start quickly with the words of James Madison. They actually inform what we're talking about today, and he said the federal Constitution forms a happy combination, the great and aggregate interests being referred to the national, the local, and particular to the state legislatures. My point here is simply that the historic trend of the Bureau of Land Management over its history is to become a national agency with values that go from providing for human occupancy and use, grazing, oil and gas, to now more wildlife and environmental values with constituencies that run throughout the United States. That's been its history. I'd say it's pretty much followed the path now of the U.S. Forest Service as a multiple-use agency. If we're going to talk about reorganization, we all know that there's no such thing as a neutral reorganization. Those of us who study public administration know that there will be people advantaged and disadvantaged by this particular reorganization. We could probably conclude that in this case, should it come to pass this way, that more local and particular interests will be advantaged, much like they were back in the day when my mentor Phil Foss wrote Politics and Grass about the BLM in the late 50s. But if this is going to proceed, we need to consider some past examples that Congresswoman Norton spoke to in the past. When they did move all the fire folks to Boise, where I'm from, they had to relocate some to Washington, D.C., because certain aspects of wildland fire operations, yes, it's in Boise, but certain policy and budget decisions ended up back in Washington to some extent. My concern, too, for the professionals in this agency is what is necessarily going to stop another administration from deciding that people belong back in Washington. And the point here is that will whipsaw these people back and forth, like unfortunately we see at times when regulations are rewritten from administration to administration, or perhaps whether we might see that regarding the Antiquities Act and National Monument, which of course is not on the agenda for this particular committee. In Idaho, we're getting the higher graded range conservationists. They're coming to Idaho, and of course we are a range state, as Congressman Fulcher knows very well. But it's unclear to people what's going to happen when that happens. I don't think 13s and 14s are going to process permits. And it might disrupt relationships that the range cons that we have in Idaho already have with our permittees, especially southern Idaho. It's also maybe going to put a chill on the BLM professionals already in the field if all of a sudden positions they thought they could compete with are now being filled by Washington people instead. In other words, there will be no professional movement like they thought there might be in the past. One other thing to consider is that, and granted this is not part of this proposal, but nonetheless BLM has a very successful collaborative framework with its RAC, its Resource Advisory Councils. They're very decentralized and very deliberative. And this administration seems to want to reduce the number of federal advisory committees, which ironically can put a bit of a chill on the very thing we all agree on, which is localized collaboration and getting people together around the table to try to solve these very difficult problems that agencies like the BLM, so forth and so on, have to deal with. Last point, Ed Shepard is sitting next to me. I've worked with him a long time. I work with PLF on their student congresses where they bring young Americans together to learn about BLM management. It's interesting to me that 600 former BLM officials of all persuasions, from oil and gas to wilderness, 12,000 years of experience, and they all don't think this is a good idea. That's pretty rare to have that kind of unanimity, and I think it's at least worth considering some of the things that these folks who've been here in Washington are concerned about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Freema. The chair now recognizes Mr. Edward W. Shepard, President of the Public Lands Foundation. Mr. Shepard, you have 5 minutes.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present our views on this reorganization. PLF is not political. Our members have proudly served BLM directors of both political parties, so our perspective is based on decades of on-the-ground experience managing the public lands. Cumulatively, we represent thousands of years of experience and knowledge on management and the organization, and at all levels and locations of the organization. We strongly oppose this reorganization plan. The espoused objectives are sound and good. How they want to get to meet those objectives, we don't feel are right. The plan would remove BLM headquarters leadership and staff in D.C. from having a seat at the table with national agencies within the Department of the Interior and with other agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service and Agriculture, with the Congress, and with Washington-based NGOs. It would place the director and assistant directors in one location in Grand Junction, Colorado, and would separate them from the remaining staff, which would be located over several locations in the West. BLM is a multiple-use agency by its history and by the mandates of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976. As a multiple-use agency, it's imperative that the disciplines work together on a day-to-day basis to coordinate policy and activities, and separating and isolating staff to several locations would severely limit their ability to do so. And we feel this plan is so radical that we really questioned if it was studied by non-political budget analysts or organizational experts, and whether career BLM senior management was involved or consulted. One reason given for the organization is to move decision-making closer to the field. We agree decision-making should be closer to the field, but we do not believe that this reorganization is necessary to achieve that goal. We fully recognize that we fully believe that this reorganization will functionally dismantle the BLM and ignores the reality that BLM is already Western-based. 97% of the staff is in the field and has a structure in place to be responsive to Western constituents and stakeholders. Today, they're well organized to serve both the Western constituents and the Washington, D.C.-based clientele. Most of the managers are on the ground at field, district, and state offices, and are able to make decisions and interact with governors, tribes, other agencies, congressional staff in the field, and the other state and federal agencies they work with, and the public. State directors and field-level managers currently have the delegated authority to make decisions on the ground and to facilitate coordination with state, local governments, and tribes. However, in recent years, there have been a reduced decision-making at the field level, not so much because of the BLM headquarters, but because decisions have been pulled back by the department and other political appointees. If the goal of the plan is to return decision-making to the local level, then we suggest the department return the decision-making authority to local BLM managers who work daily with the folks in the communities. We ask that before this plan is implemented, that the Congress require an independent analysis by Congressional Budget Office or Government Accountability Office on the actual cost and savings. And finally, I'd like to address the profound effect this is having on BLM employees across the organization, primarily here in Washington, but also out in the field, who wonder what's going to happen to them career-wise. A lack of transparency and communication with employees has raised anxiety to really harmful levels, and morale levels are very low. And it's got to be remembered, these are real people, and they have real families, and they need to be considered. Many of the Washington-based employees being directed to move have personal circumstances that give them no other option than to leave the agencies, and this is going to have a long-term detrimental effect on the professionalism of BLM. Additionally, it's going to have a disproportionate negative impact on women and minorities in the BLM Washington office. And this office has made significant progress in recruiting women and minority into leadership and professional positions, and many of these employees have indicated they can't leave. So in conclusion, although we might agree with some of the objectives of this, we don't agree with the process. We feel that the people are in the field that need to make decisions, that are doing the operational work, and the folks in Washington need to be here to address the issues back here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Tony Small, Vice Chairman of the Ute Indian Tribal Business Committee. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Small.
Good morning, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the reorganization and relocation to be a BLM to Grand Junction, Colorado, which is within our homelands. My name is Tony Small. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Ute Tribe Business Committee. I am testifying on behalf of our tribe and in support of the joint comments submitted by over 20 large treaty tribes from South Dakota, Nebraska, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho. Our comments provided proposals for the reorganization of Interior, including BLM. We submitted our comments on September 21st, 2018. In the year since, there has not been any tribal consultation or reorganization of Interior. The 11 consultations Congressman Bishop was talking about were before this and did not include BLM. No BLM staff attended these consultations, and BLM relocation was never mentioned. In the spring of 2019, Interior took an action on one of our requests. They announced that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Education, and Office of Special Trustees would not be included. Again, this decision was made without any consultation. If the Interior had consulted with us, they would have seen that there are many improvements that should be made to these agencies. The impact of reorganization on Indian tribes extend far beyond these three agencies. In fact, we will be affected more than anyone else by Interior reorganization and relocation of BLM. Reorganization is already underway. Over the last couple years, long-standing offices and experienced staff have vanished, been relocated, or reorganized. These are staff and offices provided services and programs that were guaranteed in treaties and agreements between us and the United States. The United States was founded on these treaties and agreements, and any changes to these programs or services requires consultation. The relocation of BLM to Grand Junction will have a dramatic impact on our interests. We are a major oil and gas producing tribe. We rely on energy development to fund our government, provide services to our members. We create hundreds of millions in economic activity. Even though Congress specifically excluded Indian lands from BLM, the Secretary violated FLTMA by directing BLM to provide oil and gas permits, conducting inspections, and much more on Indian lands. If BLM reorganized, these activities should go back to BIA. In addition, the millions in funding that goes to BLM should be transferred to BIA to properly manage energy development on Indian lands. This is important to BLM. BLM manages public lands for multiple use for general public. BIA manages Indian lands in the best interests of tribes. BLM has no business making public land decisions on Indian lands. However, as long as BLM continues its activities on Indian lands, Interior and BLM are required to consult with us on reorganization. Moving BLM to Grand Junction will impact energy permitting on our lands. No one is talking about moving the White House or Congress to Grand Junction or any other agencies involved in energy permitting on Indian lands. Moving BLM will reduce coordination, drain expertise, eliminate accountability. Rather than drain a swamp, BLM will become a tool of special interest and will lose focus on its national missions, including trust responsibility to tribes. Grand Junction is in our original homelands. In 1880, we entered into an agreement with the United States to give up millions of acres and to resettle along the Grand River near modern-day Grand Junction. These lands were rich with water resources, but the United States forced us at gunpoint further west into what would become eastern Utah. In this rocky desert, 1.9 million acre reservation was established for our benefit. Ever since, our Uncompahgre Reservation in Utah has been under attack. First, non-Indians overgrazed lands intended for our stock, and today BLM permits energy development on our lands. Billions have been made in energy leases and royalties on our Uncompahgre Reservation. BLM splits this money with the state. We have never been paid for the use of our lands. Year after year, the United States forces us to go to court to protect our lands and enforce treaties, agreements, and trust responsibilities. This must stop. The United States was founded on treaties and agreements with Indian tribes. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Without these treaties and agreements, the United States would not be here. Any organization of Interior or BLM must be done with our interests in mind and in consultation with us. You have treaties, agreements, and promises to live up to. Thank you for your consideration of our testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. And the chair recognizes Mr. Tipton for 30 seconds to introduce Ms. Robin Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure for me to be able to have the opportunity to be able to introduce Robin Brown, who happens to be from my district out of Grand Junction, Colorado. Robin is the Executive Director of the Grand Junction Economic Partnership, which is the economic development agency for Mesa County, and its primary focus is recruiting businesses in Colorado's Grand Valley. Prior to moving to Grand Junction in 2010, it's worthy of note that Robin spent 8 years as an attack Army helicopter pilot, deploying twice to Iraq. She also managed public relation businesses and founded Spoke and Blossom, a lifestyle magazine for Western Colorado. And I'd like to thank Robin for her service to our country and for being here today to talk about the benefits of moving the BLM headquarters to Grand Junction, Colorado.
Thank you, Congressman. As the Congressman said, my name is Robin Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Grand Junction Economic Partnership, which is the economic development agency for the greater Grand Junction area. Grand Junction, with a population of 151,000 people, is the largest metropolitan area in western Colorado. We are located about 3.5 hours west of Denver on Interstate 70, halfway to Salt Lake City on the western side of the Rocky Mountains. We're also about a 5-hour drive from Nevada and an $80 plane ride to Las Vegas. And we have 1,500 federal employees. There's been a lot of misinformation about Grand Junction today, so I just wanted to get a few corrections in there. We have 18 to 20 daily flights a day from our airport that go to many more locations that were on the slide earlier. Mesa County, where I reside, is 76% public lands. Our economy depends on that land and both the above ground and below ground natural resources that come from them. In Grand Junction, we believe that we can do it all on public lands in a way that both protects and conserves the very lands that we rely on for a healthy economy. Colorado has the toughest oil and gas regulations in the country, and the industry has responded using technology to severely reduce emissions while increasing production. Today, we are able to extract fossil fuels in a safer and cleaner way, reducing the impact on climate change while also providing high-paying jobs and a direct economic impact to our rural communities. With all of that energy production going on, we are also an outdoor recreation mecca. From my back door, I can hike in a national monument, mountain bike on world-class single-track trails, kayak the Colorado River, or just sit in my back porch and look at the abundant wildlife that wanders through, whether it's deer, bighorn sheep, pheasant, quail, mountain lions, or bear. If I hop into my car, I can hunt big game, fish, snowmobile, Nordic, or downhill ski within a 40-mile drive from my home. Colorado has the best public land hunting in the country, and people come from all over the world to take advantage of it. It's not unusual to run across wild horses in Mesa County. They roam the desert area north of Grand Junction known as the Book Cliffs. Just south of those desert lands are vast rangelands where local ranching families run cattle for beef production, which is Colorado's #1 ag export. National conservation areas, we've got 3. Wilderness study areas, yep. Grand Junction is home to the Colorado Mesa University with a current enrollment of 11,000 students. Within the university, the Natural Resource Center works with federal, state, and local governments to adopt policies that promote the value of multiple use and sustained yield. The Unconventional Energy Center conducts research to help energy producers understand regulatory predictability and both reduce operating costs and the impact on the environment. This institute positions Grand Junction as the epicenter of energy innovation. Both of these institutes work closely with our regional BLM office as they study, research, and implement land use policies and procedures. In other words, every single thing that the BLM does can be researched, studied, and put into practice in Mesa County, Colorado. The arguments against moving the headquarters is based on a lack of trust. Well, I wouldn't trust somebody I've never met either, so I invite you all out to Grand Junction to meet the very people who worry you so much, and then we could correct a lot of the misinformation that's been put out today. I'd introduce you to Janie Van Winkle. Janie is a second-generation beef rancher that grazes her cattle on public lands. She's also the best conservationist I know because as a rancher, she understands that the lands that she drives her cattle over year after year have to remain healthy in order for her herds to remain healthy. I'd introduce you to Scott Winans. Scott is the president of the Colorado Plateau Mountain Bike Association, a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization that builds, maintains, and advocates for mountain bike trails all over western Colorado. There is no better advocacy group for the proper maintenance and long-term health of our trail system. Try riding your bike on a trail after it rains or taking a shortcut where there is no trail, and you will get a quick and fierce lesson of proper trail etiquette as you would deserve. I'd introduce you to Quint Shear, a fifth-generation Coloradan and landman who could tour you through a number of well pads on the Grand Mesa that intertwine in and out of his favorite hunting and hiking grounds. With proper planning, these industries can and already do coexist. The idea that BLM leadership shouldn't be influenced by the communities that rely on our public lands is misguided. It tells me that you don't trust Janie, Scott, Quint, or people like us from rural communities to advocate for the highest and best use of our public lands. It also tells me that you don't trust your own leadership to know the difference between those with good intentions and those with bad. And that's ironic, because last year in Washington, D.C., there were 11,654 registered lobbyists that spent $3.4 billion influencing you. So I don't quite see why it's okay to be influenced by more lobbyists than most of these communities have in total population, with more money than all of our annual budgets combined, but not okay to be influenced by the communities who know, love, and protect our public lands best because they live, work, and play on those lands every single day. Congressmen and women, on behalf of the people of Western Colorado, on behalf of Senators Michael Bennet and Cory Gardner, on behalf of Congressman Tipton and Governor Jared Polis, I encourage you to support the relocation of the BLM headquarters to Grand Junction, Colorado, a place where there is actually BLM land. Thank you.
Turn to Ms. Holland for any questions she might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I would like to submit, without objection, a letter from Assistant Secretary Sweeney that cites especially that consultations occurred for the Department of the Interior. And it's very clear that they occurred for the Department of Interior. And I'm clarifying with this letter that no consultations were made for the BLM specifically. And without objection, I would like to submit this letter, please. Thank you. Vice Chairman Small, my questions for you. On July 23rd, Chairman Grijalva requested the Department of the Interior to suspend the BLM reorganization until adequate tribal consultation occurred. They responded to us just last week, essentially claiming the consultation they had done was more than adequate. Do you feel this is the case?
No, I don't. I think there should be more consultation with tribes.
Did you speak specifically with any of these folks specifically about BLM issues?
No.
Thank you. Why is it important that tribes be given a chance to consult on the BLM organization specifically?
Because like in my testimony, I was talking about the energy portion of it. They handle a lot of the energy and the leasing part of that for the tribes. So it's going to affect tribes, not only ours, but other tribes with fishing and different issues that tribes have. So there needs to be more consultation with tribes.
Thank you. And in your experience, have agency reorganizations and alterations generally improved services to tribes?
When there has been consultation, but most of the time, no.
Most of the time they don't benefit, or most of the time they don't do the consultation?
Most of the time they don't benefit and don't do the consultation.
Okay, thank you. How might this hastily planned reorganization impact your tribe?
The reorganization would impact my tribe financially, in every which way, holding up leases. It's the one-stop shop that the tribe would have. You'd be having people in 2-3 different time zones trying to work on issues. And we've been through that before with our energy issues, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the impact is going to be detrimental to us because we depend on so much on our energy.
Thank you. As I've shown in my Honoring Promises legislative proposal, which I'm leading with Senator Warren, it's time for the federal government to start taking its commitments and obligations to tribal nations seriously. This needs to involve reorganizations, it needs to involve shifting resources, but it cannot take place without the input of tribal communities, and it should not be allowed to put important tribal resources in jeopardy. And I thank you all for being here, for testifying, and Mr. Chairman, I yield Oh, I have one more, I'm sorry. Thank you. I don't have eyes behind my head. I have a question for Mr. Shepherd. Mr. Shepherd, the Public Lands Foundation has expressed concerns that this reorganization will impact diversity at the BLM. I find this especially concerning as minorities make up less than 30% of the Department of the Interior workforce. Can you briefly explain why this reorganization would disproportionately impact diversity at the BLM? And do you believe that this will undermine efforts to address the longstanding challenge of increasing diversity at the department?
Well, where we've had BLM has had some of its greatest success has been back here in the Washington, D.C., attracting women and minorities into professional and leadership positions. And, you know, the people that are here and in those jobs have found that they really, at this time, cannot leave. Or many of them have, not only women and minorities, but at the other employees also. When you look at the demographics of the West, it's a little tougher to recruit women, minorities in particular, in the West. BLM's done a better job of bringing in women and minorities, but we're nowhere near where they need to be. And so I think losing the folks that we have, which are doing a great job, would be a big detriment to the Bureau for a long time.
Thank you very much. I yield, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Ms. Brown. When we were listening to the testimony earlier, there was a significant number of concerns that were raised about access, about air travel, lack of access via common airports, connections. How do you respond to that, please?
18 to 20 direct flights a day from Grand Junction to 8 locations. Our air service is actually improving tremendously as our economy has improved. And so currently we have 2 other direct flights that are coming online in the next 2 years. So it is not at all hard. We have a number of, manufacturing is a large industry for us. We have a lot of manufacturers that regularly travel to Asia or around the country to do their work. You can work on a global scale from Grand Junction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up. Ms. Brown, there's other ways to communicate as well, and more and more of that is done via the web, whether it be some sort of conference call or internet video call, those types of things.
We do have internet in the West.
Well, that's my question in terms of broadband. What's the broadband coverage, and is it universal across that region? Because not all parts of the country are that way.
Yes, we are a large enough market that, I mean, there are markets where I could see where that would be a concern, but we are a large enough market that we have plenty of fast and good and reliable service. My husband actually is in the energy industry, works out of our house, and does all of his work online across the global.
Last question, you said you had BLM ground in Mesa County, Grand Junction area. How much of that ground do you have?
How many acres?
How many acres? What's the?
I probably should know that. It's 360 degrees, it surrounds me.
The point is, there's a lot
Plenty.
of that. There's a lot of that within the immediate region, and you're
Yeah,
responsible.
76% of our county is public lands, and most of that's BLM. There is some U.S. Forest Service and National Monument.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Gomer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Brown, I know you seem concerned or maybe a little bit bothered that people are concerned about moving the Bureau of Land Management office to Grand Junction. And I got to say, it causes me concern because 99% has already come out. 99% of the land of the BLM is west of the Mississippi. So I've been to Grand Junction. It's a lovely place. It's beautiful. But this basically puts the BLM headquarters right in the middle of the land they control. And that is so inconsistent with a bloated bureaucracy ruling on high from Washington to actually have the people that are managing the land at that land. So I hope you don't take offense. This is just very uncharacteristic for the federal government to do something that makes this much sense. So people immediately become suspicious when the federal government does something that makes sense like this. So I hope you don't take too much offense to that. Have you spoken to many of the federal employees that work in Grand Junction now that you brought up in your written testimony?
Well, because we have so many in Grand Junction, yes, in my social circle, meet and are friends with many federal employees.
Do they all pretty much indicate being offended that they have to work in Grand Junction?
Well, I think if you have spent your entire life dedicated to an organization like the BLM or some other public lands management agency, you usually like the things that come with those public lands. And so my sense is you want to live near those lands, you want to take part in the activities that come with those lands. And so I think that most of the employees that I know, whether they work for the Department of Energy, U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, or BLM, are very happy to live in Grand Junction. I would say I was a little surprised by one of the testimony mentioned that 40% of the BLM employees in DC would not want to move, and I would argue that if you have a BLM employee that doesn't want to live near BLM land, that's probably the sign that you should reorganize.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. Yeah, they don't get out enough, as we say back in East Texas. They just don't get out enough. Well, you mentioned before the relocation task force that's there to help with the move. Could you give us more detail about what that will do?
Sure. So we recognize very clearly how hard it is, and we recruit a lot of companies to Colorado. Right now, we have a lot of interest in California companies to come to Colorado. And so we have an employee relocation program that helps move employees and helps make that transition as easy as possible. So we help you find housing, we help get your kids in schools, any special needs programs that are necessary. We familiarize the people with the area, especially if it's, a lot of people have not been to Grand Junction, especially from the coastal areas. And so giving a familiarization course on the area, helping, and probably the most important one is helping spouses find jobs. Most households these days, I think, are dual income, and so helping to find a job for the spouse, or the partner, I should say, the Trailing Partners program is almost as important as getting the company. So we do a lot of hand-holding and making sure that transition is as seamless as it can be.
What structure do you have for doing that? You have actual employees on the task force that are helping to seek jobs for the government spouses?
So we have a number of great partners in Grand Junction, specifically the Mesa County Workforce Center that helps us to do the job placement. Also, my board is made up of CEOs and presidents all across the valley, and so we do a lot of direct, depending on the experience and the industry that person is in, helping to make those direct connections, and you can do that in a smaller town. Really help with those, build those relationships and get both the partner and the employee kind of enmeshed as quickly in the community as possible.
So if there are BLM employees or spouses of BLM employees that are moving to Grand Junction, with whom should they get in contact to help them take advantage of
They
what's
should get in
there?
touch with me at the Grand Junction Economic Partnership.
And do you have a phone number there?
I do. It's 970-683-8778.
All right, thank you. That's now part of the record, and hopefully they'll take advantage of it. Thanks for
Yes.
being here.
Yes, Ms. Robin, I do see some consequences with this move. It's the Palisades peaches and the Olathe corn. People are going to discover that Colorado has the best peaches in the country. So,
Agreed.
I'm very familiar with the area. So, in my multiple times that I've been there, it's a warm community. It's an embracing community. And one of the things that I noticed in your testimony is that you embrace an all-the-above energy policy. Why is that important right now?
So we've historically been dependent on only one industry, and that was energy, and that hasn't served us well, just because of the boom and bust cycle that comes with being reliant on one industry. And so in the last 3 to 4 years, we've made serious efforts at diversifying the economy. We've seen incredible results over the last couple of years. Tech is probably our fastest growing industry. Outdoor industry manufacturing is another really fast growing industry. We love those industries. But we don't want to, again, be reliant on just one. In Colorado, we have a lot of towns that we watch that only have tourism or only have outdoor rec, and you don't want to be beholden to one industry no matter what, because seasonality and a variety of reasons. So over the last 2 years, we've really built a diverse economy based on many, many industries, and so we feel that we can weather most storms that come. But all of those industries, almost all of them, rely on our public lands simply because the abundance of them around us.
Now, I'm from Arizona, and we drink whiskey because water's for fighting over. So can you tell us what major river you're close to?
So the Colorado River runs direct, well, we're named for the junction of the Colorado and the Gunnison River.
So you're telling me that we'd actually have people in the know making decisions that would have to live and understand the river dynamics.
Absolutely.
So there's another plus.
Yep.
Wow. That seems like, and then last time I looked, there was an overcommitment on Colorado River water to population base. Am I right?
Yes, water is serious business in the West.
Wonderful. Now, you also in your testimony said that all of these studies and verifications can be outlined why Grand Junction fits the bill. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So all of our, I think I just named, we do every single thing within the BLM's mission in our county, and then we have a great university that helps us study and develop that land use policy.
Mesa State?
Colorado Mesa University.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, fastest growing university in Colorado, 4th fastest growing in the nation. And so between there, we just have a number of programs there that help and work with our land management agencies to help to study, research, and develop that policy.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that university. My daughter plays for Regis.
Oh.
Yeah, so we got there. You got a very good athletic program.
We do.
Yeah, very, very
RMAC.
good.
Yep.
So the other thing that I wanted to highlight is you make a very important fact of conservation, involved in hunting, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes.
And so you understand that the real conservation aspects of those hunters that are involved and people that understand. I look at Ducks Unlimited, I look at the
Absolutely.
Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Can you tell me highlight a little bit more about the environmentally friendly conservation aspect of Grand Junction and that west side of Colorado?
So we have all kinds of advocacy groups for all kinds of issues that span, you could name it, when it comes to public lands or land or game management. So I serve as the Western Hunting Representative for the Wildlife Council, which is the marketing arm for CPW. And so understanding how game is managed and the importance of the long-term viability of those species is incredibly important to our community, because hunting also is an economic driver, brings in a lot of money to the community as well, both hunting and fishing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and hiking and everything
Yes.
else. So it's very, very dynamic. And I think that's important to pick out, that people that don't want to really go out there really probably don't understand the real dynamics of what's going on within the public lands use.
Absolutely, and I think it's indicative of the urban-rural divide that exists across the nation today, and why this discussion is what it is, because I think that communities in urban areas, and vice versa, communities in rural areas do not understand each other anymore.
Yeah, maybe we ought to send everybody some sea slugs.
Or peaches.
There you go, there you go. I just want to commend you. I think it's a great location. It's centrally located. There's so many aspects here. Hands-on to me is everything.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate
I applaud your effort, and I'm looking very forward to seeing a government closest to the people. Thank you.
Well, first of all, we have to settle one issue that is probably the most important one. So I can invite you to Peach Days back in Brigham City, Utah, which is the headquarters of peaches. If you really want good peaches, it's our rocky soil. So, yeah, you can take that crap back if you want to at some point. Well, we'll take you to Peach City and have the peach pie and everything else that's around it. Georgia crap. We got the peaches there. Beyond that, Ms. Brown, appreciate you being here. One of the other witnesses said that if we move this to Grand Junction, it will have a profound, disproportionate, and negative impact on women and minority employees. You happen to be the only woman on the panel, so what's it like living in such a repressive, regressive area of Grand Junction, and how have you managed to survive under such terrible, terrible atmosphere of repression?
So I keep thinking about that comment and trying to understand exactly what it's saying, and I don't know, the only thing I can take from it is that for some reason rural communities are unfriendly to, especially in the West, to women or minorities. I'm not sure if that was what that comment meant. I can only speak from my personal experience that Grand Junction's a great place to be a woman. We have many of our leadership positions are held by women. Our airport director, mayor, city council, county commissioners, both our chamber and our economic development agency run by women. There are often times where we have meetings on public projects and there are only women sitting around. We could probably use a few good men out there. So my experience has been great. I have no issue being a woman in Western Colorado.
Thank you. I appreciate that response to some statements that were truly outrageous. Look, one of the problems we do have as interns, this is a very expensive place to live. How would that be different if actually there were not only jobs in Grand Junction, but also New Mexico, Arizona, Boise, Utah, Nevada?
So if it really comes down to numbers, there's absolutely no question that these communities in the West are significantly more affordable than Washington, D.C. I think everyone would agree with that one. But also, Colorado Mesa University has a really high percentage of first-generation college kids. So it provides opportunities for kids that might not otherwise get those opportunities. And of course, having the BLM headquarters would be an incredible internship opportunity for kids that would never have the opportunity to travel all the way across the country to Washington, D.C. and have to find an apartment. Our average home price is $260,000. There's no comparison to just the cost of doing business or the cost of living in a place like Grand Junction compared to Washington, D.C.
I realize every place has stereotypes, and hopefully we have broken down some of the stereotypes that have been presented in some of the testimony here. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate that. I'm sure Mr. Tipton appreciates it, and I've also been to Grand Junction for several conferences and meetings. It's a nice place.
It is a nice place. Thank you.
Yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Robin brought up the issue of trust and the issue being that those of us who have objections and questions to this move, this relocation to Grand Junction, that we don't trust the people of Grand Junction. Just for the correction in the record, I don't think it's a question of distrust of the people of Grand Junction. Fine people, don't have a problem with that. It's the distrust that's centered on this administration, their motivation, and what is really behind the move that we are trying to get at. So if there's distrust, I would readily admit that it's abundant when it comes to the decision-making at the Department of Interior and at BLM. The people of Grand Junction weren't responsible for this decision. And if the consequences are favorable, you're supporting that. For some of us, we have other questions that go much deeper than the fine people of Grand Junction.
I appreciate that, Chairman.
Mr. Frumouth, public lands belong to all Americans. But it seems this reorganization, in my mind, will push a lot of the decision-making to specific states, whether it's Grand Junction, Reno, et cetera. What impact will this have on national policy from that perspective?
That's a good question, Mr. Chair. Of course, the first point is obviously, as Ed and others have said, BLM is organized by state, and the state directors do have much authority to make most BLM policy. And ironically, that is probably more local and regional driven than the other federal agencies, which are organized more by region, not by state. But to the other part of your question, I think we all know that there are decisions best made in the field, but there will be decisions that come to Washington to be resolved. Interagency conflicts, agencies, or questions of national importance that have to be talked about by Congress and others. And if BLM leadership is not in those conversations, then somebody else is going to make those decisions, and BLM won't be able to represent the values it holds in terms of multiple use in all its constituencies. I'm not arguing that BLM ought to make the decision, but if it's not at the table, as the cliche goes, it's dinner.
Thank you. Mr. Shepard, Acting Director Pendley admitted that no consultation had occurred with agency staff before the decision to uproot lives. You noted there is a lot of anxiety within the agency because of this. Is there reason to believe that folks might leave BLM in significant numbers as a consequence of these administrative decisions that have been made?
I can't speak to how many will, but I have been told, and I have been told by people that said they will not move, they cannot move, they might move in the future, but they cannot move at this time, and they'll leave the agency. They'll either go to another agency in Interior, they'll go to another like Forest Service or somebody else, or they'll just leave government completely.
And the impact on the agency if that were to occur?
The impact of the agency is that these are our senior level people. They've got years of experience in the Bureau, many of them, most of them with years of experience in the field, and that's going to leave. That's going to go. You know, BLM was intended to send people into Washington and get their experience in Washington and go back out to the field. So many of them expected to go back out eventually anyway, but they won't, you know, if they are forced out and leave the agency, then that just won't happen, and the field will lose that experience of the Washington skills that they pick up here.
If you can briefly respond to the reaction to your statement relative to the effect on gender, women, and people of color in terms of this reorganization.
Well, what I intended by that statement is that we have a lot of women and a lot of people of color here in the Washington office, and in the Washington office, if those people don't move west, then we've lost the skills that those people have and the experience that they've gained. That was not intended to say that Grand Junction isn't friendly in any way, or any place else, for that matter.
Yeah, these are not just little boxes. These are people's lives, families, and the consequence of this move can't just be supported simply because we're moving little boxes. We're affecting people's lives in a very direct and profound way. I think we need to be cognizant of that, and certainly the administration needs to be cognizant of that. I don't have any other questions. Let me turn now to Mr. Tipton for any questions he might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here today. Last Congress introduced legislation to be able to have the BLM conduct a study on the opportunity to be able to move those headquarters out to the west. I think it's worthy of note that this was actually bipartisan. Congressman Perlmutter out of Colorado, a former member of this committee and now the governor of Colorado, and we just saw a video of him not long ago, Jared Polis, also signed on to that proposal and now are embracing that move of the BLM literally to the west. Ms. Brown, I'd like to maybe get an answer from you, but first I'd like to be able to point out that I am concerned that we're seeing the potential to try and just drive political partisanship into something that's actually trying to be able to direct what's going to be good policy. Mr. Small, you talked about the importance of energy to the Northern Ute tribe. Happens to be equally important in Mesa County, happens to be equally important in other areas of Utah, throughout western Colorado as well. To be able to have the people on the ground, to be able to administer those programs, to be able to look at the permits, to be able to advance those, might actually well be a benefit. But would like to maybe submit for the record, Mr. Chairman, if I may, a letter from the Associated Governments of Northwest Colorado for the record. Thanks, sir. They write in this letter that the condition of public lands has declined due to the misunderstanding of land management principles by urban centers across the U.S. The situation is exacerbated by the location of senior land management leadership in Washington. People who do not live and work daily with the decisions that they make and the division around the appropriate management of public lands has served to further the urban-rural divide. I personally fully support the BLM's decision to be able to relocate the headquarters out west, and I'm obviously very pleased that the Interior Secretary chose Grand Junction. I know that a lot went into that process of selecting Grand Junction. So, Ms. Brown, I'm hoping maybe you can talk a little bit about that process of the organization and others in Mesa County, how they engaged with the Department of Interior during the selection process. Did the department request information from you? If so, what information did the department require? Were there any meetings between the department representatives and the folks from Grand Junction and Mesa County leading up to that selection?
So I believe in May, we received a request for information from the DOI, and it asked, and then we had a series of phone calls exchanging information. But it was, they appeared to be doing a cost comparison across cities across the West, was my understanding, and so they wanted very detailed information on average cost per square foot for office, average cost per square foot for housing, closing costs, rental inventory, housing inventory, workforce. So they, a workforce report, what kind of workforce we have in Mesa County. And so we gathered that information over a couple of weeks and continued to send them. And so it was just repeated phone calls and emails back and forth between the DOI and my office gathering that type of information.
What would you see, and would you really speak to the benefit that you see of moving the BLM headquarters to Grand Junction to the west?
I mean, the benefit in my mind is it better serves the communities that rely on public lands. But there's the added benefit, there's no question that there's a huge cost a huge cost savings across any of the cities that were considered for the BLM headquarters compared to Washington, D.C. But if it really comes down to what's the most important reason for this move, it's to better serve the communities that rely on our public lands.
Well, when we're talking about the public lands, how important is that in the West? You can speak specifically to Mesa County, but you've lived there long enough now. Just to the West, how important are those public lands? Responsible energy development, the access to the public lands for hiking, for fishing, for hunting.
I mean, it's the most important factor of providing great jobs for the people in our community. It's kind of interesting because Colorado is a microcosm of what's happening at the national level. Our state is divided, as you know, Congressman, with the Rocky Mountains. And east of the Rocky Mountains is primarily all private land. And west of the Rocky Mountains is primarily all public lands. And so our economies are very, very different between the Eastern Plains and the western part of the state. And so it is the most important thing that affects our economy and the jobs and, getting kids off free reduced lunch.
I want to applaud really a lot of the comments that you've made. I think we've heard through some of the questions, not with malintent, but some of the distinguishing factors. It would be a real benefit to be able to move to Grand Junction. Appreciate you making the effort to be out here and to be able to advocate for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to again thank you for your courtesy in allowing me to ask questions, and I have appreciated the testimony of all the witnesses. I do want to lay to rest this affordability question. It is an argument for decentralizing the entire federal government. There's a reason that the framers decided that the federal agencies and the federal government itself should be here. As to affordability, of course, parts of the country are more affordable than others, Ms. Brown, but do note that Amazon, which is a private sector employer, is moving people to the District of Columbia and the region, and we're not just talking about this city. And the reason has much to do with the high education levels in this region, the kind of levels that are needed for a headquarters staff, which brings me to my point. One has to wonder why we're here. Virtually, this entire agency is in the field, which is where it should be. Essentially, the argument on the other side is against a headquarters staff. If this proposal were to go through, there would be virtually no headquarters staff, and it would be the only agency that did not have a headquarters staff present here in the nation's capital. It is an extreme proposal, to put it mildly. There's a reason that reorganizations are rarely done, and this question really goes to Mr. Shepard. Perhaps there are ways to improve the federal government, but if you reorganize even one agency, you throw so much up into the air. for it to land with no experience as to what to do when it lands, that the federal government most often throws up its hands and says, when you look at the cost, when you look at the loss of personnel, when you look at the hassles, we just don't get enough out of reorganizations to do them. And the case needs to be made here, and I haven't heard it yet, for an overriding necessity to say, we'll take all of that, even though the agency's already in the field, we'll throw it all up in the air to get these few employees out of headquarters. I was intrigued, Mr. Shepard, that you mentioned what is always of moment to me. Maybe it's because I'm a lawyer. I look to precedent. Have we ever done this before? What has been? Well, so will it teach us how to do it in the present? And you referenced that there had been past reorganization efforts, that they had been problematic, and even ultimately reversed. I wonder if you have any detail you could offer the committee on prior reorganizations of any kind.
One example that I can give from my personal experience when I was back on forestry staff here in Washington, D.C., is we moved a lot of folks west to what we called centers of excellence. And when they went to out to the west, they became a part of that state. Whether it was intended to or not, that's just human nature. They became part of that state organization. And a lot of the knowledge of what went on, if you went to Oregon, you didn't know what was going on in Utah or Colorado because you were in that state, you concentrated on that state, and you also, the way this reorganization was, you won't even have, and that way in 91 also, you don't have the benefit of going over, if you're a forester and you're making a decision on a policy level thing, you can't walk over to the wildlife staff that also does policy because they're not there, and that's an issue that's going to happen with this reorganization. You need to work together between interdisciplinary teams, and it won't be there when they're spread out all over the place.
This point you're making is important. There's a whole agency involved here. Somebody has to have the perspective to look across the board at the entire agency. That's why we have headquarters staff here in the first place. In the case of BLM, the Congress in its wisdom has said, notwithstanding the need for headquarters staff, we're going to put virtually all of you in the field, and yet there comes this extreme proposal before this committee to essentially have almost no headquarters staff. I cannot believe that the House and the Senate will look kindly on this matter.
If I could quickly add one thing on that, it's not only interdisciplinary within the BLM, it's also working with other agencies. All of the natural resource agencies are headquartered in Washington, and there is a lot of work that goes on between those agencies where BLM would not have career professionals at the table.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the witnesses. As under committee rules, members can submit questions to the witnesses within 3 business days following this hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for those responses. And I want to thank all of you, and also thank Vice Chairman Small. Didn't have a question for you, but I appreciated you clarifying the consultation issue. Very much appreciated. With that, let me adjourn the meeting and thank everybody. Why is this here?